I've found is the best global church songs really come from local church songs. And even the global church songs we're singing, a lot of them were written, not all of them, but were written for a local church setting. And as a songwriter, it's so much more inspiring to write from something.
Welcome back to the AWI podcast. This is a space for authentic conversations surrounding Christian worship, discussing questions on theology, artistry, and leadership. We are back with Tommy Walker, and we will be discussing songs in the church. And you are a worship leader, you're a singer-songwriter, you're a speaker, author, and you've served at your home church Christian Assembly in Los Angeles, California for over 30 years, which is awesome. You've written over 400 songs, some such as He Knows My Name and We Will Remember, songs that churches around the world know and sing. I was just wondering what has your experience been with writing songs in your whole life, but also specifically for the church? I know that's a big question.
It's a big question. When I learned the third chord, I think it was E, A, and when I learned B7, I was like, I wrote a song because I thought when you learn guitar, you wrote songs. So just, not that any of them were any good, but it came natural to me to write songs. So then I was writing songs and in my little Christian bands, and then, a long story short, I moved from Texas to LA to go to music school, and I was trying to be an artist, and I was passing, I would I know a cousin of a friend who knows a producer at a record company, so I'd give him my demo, and I'd never hear back, and just constantly being rejected. And then through the course of that, I found Christian Assembly and started leading worship at Christian Assembly, and at a point, and my pastor knew I was a songwriter. At a point, he said the magic words. He said, well, why don't you write songs for Christian Assembly? And I thought to myself, well, nobody else wants my songs. I've only been rejected. And it was kind of one of those things in our lives where we have a plan. It's the joke, right? How do you make God laugh? Tell him your plans. Anyways, but I had this plan, and it wasn't like the plan was completely off, but the plan had to take a right turn. I was like, oh, okay, I've been writing songs my whole life, but now I need to try to write congregational songs. I need to make a switch. And how would I write a song that everyone could sing? So I was thinking, well, I've got the melodies need to be really, very singable and, within an octave and things like that. So I started writing. Really, it was a profound moment in time because it was also simultaneously, in a sense, giving up my plan and my dream to be this famous artist or whatever, and say, well, I'm just a local church guy gonna write songs. This is one of my gifts, and I'm gonna serve. I remember my mom telling me, Tommy, don't wait for the perfect moment to serve. Somehow serve today, like serve your local church, serve your friends, your people, whatever. So I was brand new to Christian, and back up a little bit, brand new to Christian Assembly. I walk up to the pastor. I said, you don't know me, but I'm here to serve. If you need anything, let me know. So then I started leading worship for like a life group in somebody's home, and I remember thinking, I just finished music school. God, I risked all. I left Texas, and everyone thought I was crazy. And I'm driving my El Camino down the 10 freeway, and all my clothes blew out, and here I am, and this is it. I'm just gonna lead worship for these 10 people in this living room. But it was like God said, be faithful in the little. And so I just started doing that, became the worship leader, and then back to where I was. So then I started writing songs for Christian Assembly, and then back in those days, it was called CDs. We made a worship CD, an album, and they started getting passed around somehow, and then the songs started getting recorded by other people all because I was serving my local church. Is kind of the moral of the story. And I know I'm going on and on here, but I have such a passion for worship leader songwriters, which I hear is what you do as well. Is people so want to just kind of write a song and it be a famous song, but the best way to go about it is to lead worship in a church and write songs for your local congregations. Like, what is your pastor's sermon series? What is God saying to your community? And be the songwriting voice for your community. So you go up to your pastor and you say, what's your next sermon or whatever, and then write a song to complement that. And then you're a complete success as a songwriter if you write a worship song and your church is connecting with God, glorifying God with your song. So I just finished actually a songwriting retreat we did at where we picked 9 writers from all over the country just to preach what I just preached, and they all wrote songs and we recorded them and everything just to encourage songwriting from the church. And I think the Bride of Christ, boy, I'm going on and on. The Bride of Christ would be so beautiful and interesting if we sang songs from more different people than just such a select few.
Yeah, fully agree, because it's so easy for, okay, what's the top worship hits? Yeah. What is everyone listening to? What, like, is popular and, like, gets people going? Like, let's do those songs. But there is so much beauty in, the local church, in even smaller songs. And, I love that. What would you, if your church doesn't open up space for that, how do you go about that?
Yeah. What, like I was saying, what can help is you talk to your pastor and you say, Pastor, I want to be a team player. I love the sermon series. I love the way you preach, whatever, and I want to complement it. So or maybe last week he preached on the love of God and you write a song. I wrote a song to complement your sermon. Could I play it for you? And what I'm getting at is get the pastor's buy-in and in a sense of partnership with it, as opposed to you just kind of being a lone ranger and trying to use your church to be a songwriter. Yeah. And so I've found that helps a lot. There's certainly churches that are not willing to take any risk at all, but there's churches that are, which by the way, an interesting thing, what I've found is smaller churches can be better song harvesting churches than big churches, because big churches have a real big reputation to keep, and small churches don't have as much to lose. They're like, hey, whatever you got. So there can be because to write a song, you got to remember you're creating something that a few minutes ago didn't exist on planet Earth. And so it's full of successes and failures. It's full of risk, and creativity is full of risk. So the reason why we do songs from so few writers, and because by the time you heard about goodness of God, it was already a proven song. You didn't have to wonder if it was going to be good or not, because it's been through all those processes. And because most worship leaders are volunteer and they're just barely hanging on for dear life because they're burned out or whatever, it's just whatever's the simplest and easiest and going to work for sure. So being a songwriter is more work, it's more risk. But on the other hand, you've obviously hit me on a hot topic. On the other hand, if you don't write, now I'll talk to you right now as a songwriter, if you have a songwriting gift in you and if you ignore it and you're a worship leader, you're going to be susceptible to burnout. And you need to not ignore that. You need to use that creativity God has given you. And I hope pastors that are hearing this will also realize, if you have a worship leader that has a songwriter gift, that your worship leader is going to last longer if you're more open to hearing their creativity and their songs. And so Don't ignore it, and don't be lazy, and don't not finish your songs. Go for it, and go for the risk, and go for the failure, and write the next one. Songwriting for me has been survival, and I say it humbly, but I've been at my church for 34 years, and one of the huge ways I've lasted is because I've had a place to bring that creativity. And you're just, if you were leading worship this Sunday and you were getting ready to teach one of your worship songs, I guarantee you'd have a little more bounce in your step. You'd be like, well, you'd have some nerves and some bounce. You'd have both, but hey, that's being alive,
Yeah, because it creates the element of, I've connected with this, I've sat with the Lord on this as well, and being able to bring that. This is different, but when you have like speaking moments, or like when you even introduce a new song in general, like those moments where you're able to like portray the actual meaning and the depth within something, that like puts a bounce in my step as a worship leader every time. Yeah. And so even to imagine, like, what if it was a song that like the Lord had really put on my heart and I knew was like connected to everything that's going on within our church too, like even more. That'd for sure put a bounce in my step. I love too that you said that creativity, like outlet for you, is what helps sustain you in your ministry as well, because I think we can become so routine to doing the easy songs like Love Goodness of God, but like that is like an easy go-to, and we can fall into our routines and what we know will be successful, but then that almost strips away the depth that is possible to access as a songwriter, as a creative in general. What are ways that within your church you can create spaces where people can collaborate and write songs? I know you mentioned a songwriting retreat, but what even about like weekly and stuff?
Yeah. Well, like I said, you've got to get your pastor in on it. Mm-hmm. It's the main thing. And I have created like songwriter collectives where we have a group of writers and we all write. And that can be great, but it can also be not great. Here's the bad side of it is then you feel obligated to have equality. Okay, so then you got Jim and George and Jane in your group. And let's just say, for example, like your writing gift is the highest writing gift amongst that group. But even though Jane's song's not really that good, we haven't done one of her songs yet, so you're going to teach it anyways. And then it's going to be a dud, and then what's going to happen is eventually just you're not going to do these songs, original songs anymore, because no one wants to, a church is patient, but you need to do the best songs regardless of where they're coming from in your group. So again, I'm only speaking from my experience. My experience has been, for a season there, I was the main worship leader and the main writer, and there wasn't really any question about that. So it was simple. I'd sing it for my pastor, and he'd be like, yeah, that's great, or that's not great, and then we would do it or we wouldn't do it. It was just simpler that way. So I lean that way a little bit just because that was my testimony, that was my experience. Actually, for years now, we've had more than one worship leader at my church, and so I don't lead consecutive weeks anymore. So for years, I haven't really been able to teach very many songs at my church because, let me get into this, if you're going to write a song for your church, you got to teach it well, okay? And this, I can't overstate this. If you're going to teach a song, then teach it. Everyone's so afraid of wasting time or grieving the Spirit. It's like, no, it's actually a very engaging worship leader thing to do, to say, hey, we're going to learn a new song today, and this song is about our identity in Christ, or whatever the topic is, and it's awesome, and it goes like this, and you literally shut the band down and just teach them the verse only with just a guitar or a keyboard, and then the next section and the next section, and then you get it going, and then you're like, okay, let's worship God. And people, I have found that they actually, if you're going to teach them something, they would actually like to be able to learn it as opposed to hurry through it. And then, sorry, I'm getting so deep into this, and then you have to do it consecutive weeks. So then even if you're not sure if it was good or not, you've got to do it. And my rule has been to do it 3 weeks in a row, and then you can decide this is a keeper or not a keeper. And so those are the things that have helped to keep going. So what I was going to say is, just recently I've taken on, because we have multiple services at my church, so I've kind of taken on a service. So now I'm doing consecutive weeks, and I'm able to write again. So that's my advice to you songwriters out there, you worship leaders, songwriters, and I'm telling you, we need you. And here's the other thing. Look, no one's going to beg you to write a song. I'm sorry. And that's what there's so many roadblocks to songwriting. And I compare it to like a garden. Like, no one's going to tend to your garden. It's your garden. If you're just going to let it have weeds and not grow any fruit, then that's what's going to happen. But if you tend to it, it's going to produce fruit. Only you can do it. No one's going to beg you. If you write an incredible song this year and a bunch of people get saved because of it, it's because you made a decision. I'm going to sit down and make the time. I'm going to be disciplined. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to maybe fail. I'm going to whatever, all those things. And I'm going to talk to my pastor, whatever. It's because you did all those steps. It's not going to accidentally happen.
Right. Yeah. And just like any craft, I mean, as a musician, you understand in order to get better at it, you need to do it more often and carve out the time to practice. And songwriting is the same thing. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And if you don't carve out the time, you can't expect that moment when maybe someone does ask, or maybe you're like, finally, I'll go do it. Rarely does a hit come out of that. And not that the goal is to have a hit, but you want to have good songs and like present those well. And if you don't spend the time to get better at that craft, then you're not going to ever get to that level.
Yeah, and let me speak to this, because if you're a songwriter and you're listening to me, I know one thing that's true of you, and you have an unfinished song, right? So what happens is you get all inspired. Oh, I'm all inspired. So you start the song, and maybe you're even disciplined enough. Let's just say songwriting is starting, developing, and finishing. So you're really great at starting, and you're kind of okay at developing, and you are terrible at finishing, because finishing is the hardest part. But if you think of it like what you just said, as practicing, getting better at something, you're getting better at starting because you're doing it a lot. You're getting better, you're growing at developing, but you're not practicing finishing. So you've got to finish. Even if the song's not coming out like you were originally thinking, you've got to grow in your finishing. And by the way, being a finisher is a good thing in life, in every area of your life. Yes. So finish that song.
When do you know when a song is finished?
That's right. Well, let's put it this way. It's hard to know sometimes. But if you have, like, I would say a good practice is, let's say you're like unsure, so you didn't finish it. So you started another song. Okay, and then you didn't finish that. Okay, if you got 2 unfinished songs and you're starting your third, you need to tell yourself, no, I'm not allowed to start this song until I finish those other songs. You just have to become that person and especially if you're really a chronic non-finisher, I think that perfectionists make pretty bad songwriters, because songwriting is like, what's perfect? Like, you're making something that didn't exist, though, and you got this original chorus idea. Oh, I love this. Okay, now what would a verse be? And then you come up with a verse idea, and then you love the verse more than the chorus. Then you gotta, I'm gonna throw away the chorus idea because now I have a better chorus idea. So yeah, I get all that all that happens, but then at a point you have to be like, this isn't perfect, but Tommy told me to finish. I just have to finish. I need to be that person. I need to think of it as the journey I'm on of all the songs I'll write in my whole life, and I'm going to get to that even better one if I finish this one. So I encourage people to be less of a perfectionist, to a degree, of course, to keep getting better at finishing.
Yeah, yeah. Do you discipline yourself to only be working on like one or two songs at a time so that you can finish them?
That's what I'm saying. That's going to help you develop that finishing spark. Is okay, I'll be nice. Okay, you can have 3 unfinished songs. No way should you leave more than 3 songs unfinished before you start another song. That is just, you're becoming like most of the people that say they're songwriters and they basically don't ever write a song because your unfinished song is not helping anybody. It's not doing anything for anyone. I mean, it's helping you get good at starting something, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thinking about songs specifically for the church too, when do you know if it's specifically for the local church or for like the global church? And how do you write? Is there a difference in that perspective writing?
Yeah, that's a great question because what I've found is the best global church songs really come from local church songs. And even the global church songs we're singing, a lot of them were written, not all of them, but were written for a local church setting. And as a songwriter, it's so much more inspiring to write from something. So, you just you went on a trip and I don't know, whatever, and you were in this crazy meeting where you saw all these little kids worshiping at some church, and it was so amazing. And so then you're thinking, out of that experience, which would be matched with this Bible verse, I'm writing the song, compared to, all right, I'm just going to write a top CCLA song. Like if you say to AI, like, write a worship song, it'll instantly write a song just as good as that if that's all you're trying to do.
Yeah.
You need to really be writing, again, from what God is speaking to your church, and it's going to be a more meaningful song.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Can you tell us a story of a song that you have written and how it was like birthed?
Well, I could speak to my song, He Knows My Name, 2 things about it where my pastor, it was in reverse. He wrote this was like on a Tuesday or something. He says, I'm going to preach a sermon next week called He Knows My Name is the name of my sermon. So could you write a song to go with it? So at this point, we had this relationship where it was sometimes in reverse. I was like, okay. So I'm like, He knows my name. And it's coming out really, really simple and speaking to what I was saying earlier. So it's not coming out like I was thinking. And I was like seconds away from bailing on finishing it because it's not any good. But I thought to myself, be a finisher. and on top of that, even if it's not that great, at least it's a song with the same name as the sermon, and it'll be okay for 1 week. So I did the song, and it was very okay, but it did support the sermon. And then months later, some lady in the congregation must have recorded it or something, but they ended up doing it at their women's retreat, and they come back, they say, we did this song, He Knows My Name, everyone was their father wounds were being healed, and healing and everything. It's the most amazing song. I'm like, really? So anyways, I did it again, and it ended up getting recorded and going all over the world, and all these amazing things happen. And but the reason I tell the story is I promised, seconds away from bailing on finishing it. And there's other stories about orphanages starting and having this as its theme song, and I wrote a whole book that's just full of testimonies of how God touched them through that song, and seconds away from not finishing it. So that would be one song and one story, I guess.
Yeah. And specifically writing worship songs too, musically, is there a different approach than like your average song?
Yeah. I think one thing that makes a great worship song lyrically, let's start with that, is to be a little bit more declarative than like songs that are more story telling-ish or tend to be more artisty songs, and songs that are more declaring the goodness of God, the greatness of God, who he is, his attributes, songs that are a response to who God is tend to be more congregational. And then you know, most of our songs are anthems. You'd call them musically anthems, where they're just very long, drawn out notes because they're very easy to sing. But mainly that the melodies are somewhat repetitious. I'm always voting that we make the music behind the scenes more interesting, partly because it'll make the band more excited to come to rehearsal next week. And I also have a hunch that if the music is more eclectic and more interesting, it could even draw the non-believer in more. But then on top of it, the melody can be really singable. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. What determines a singable melody?
Well, one thing that you can't do is if it's really syncopated, but the syncopation is not consistent. So if I'm like ba ba da ba ba, and so if I said ba ba da ba 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 da ba ba, I keep repeating ba ba da ba ba da da da, like even though that's ba da ba ba, even though that's syncopated, because I keep repeating the same syncopation,
they pick up on it.
No problem. But if I go ba ba da ba 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 da 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 da, like then they're out.
Yeah.
But if you're an artist and you're doing this kind of thing, it's no problem. So the rhythmical phrases, it's still kind of a mystery to me. Like I was always preaching the stay within an octave, which modern worship does not do that at all. And I'm not saying it sarcastically. I'm saying it like I genuinely don't completely understand it, because I would always kind of obey that rule. But what happens in our church or with me is we'll just do some lines up an octave, and then the other line just goes back down an octave and then back up an octave again. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you have these songs that are so rangy, you can't even do it, or else you're like, you're singing it so soft because it's part of it so soft. But somehow, I'm not going to argue with it. Like, we do them all the time. It works. So what do I know?
No, I fully get it, because even as a worship leader, there's been moments where I think all churches are different, but the way my church approaches it is they like choose the key for us, which sometimes it's not the greatest key for me, especially if it's like in a bigger range. And sometimes I have the freedom to ask to change it, but sometimes I don't. So then it's like I have to adjust. Like, okay, yeah, I am down here on that verse, but then once the chorus goes, it's like I have to sing it up, and vocally that like puts a strain on my voice. And so I'm like, if I, as a vocalist, that is like my main instrument, if me as the worship leader is struggling, I can't even imagine how the congregation, who is just like not even vocalists, struggle with that.
Yeah. Well, like for years, if you want to get into worship leading, for years I decided, okay, so I'm never going to have a song that goes above a D. But now I feel like in recent years, the females don't even want to sing a D. A C is this top note they want to sing. Okay, fine. So then that's how I'll figure out my key. Whatever the key needs to be, so that the top note is a C, because most females can sing a C. And, and if it creeps up a little bit more because it's just one note here and there, that's fine. So that's how I did my worship leading for all these years. But then these super rangy songs come in, and if you do it where you're going to keep it to the C, then the verse is so dang low you can't even sing it. So that's why I was doing that example before, where you're within literally a verse, you're like doing an octave up and an octave down. This is probably really boring to you. But
no, as a worship leader, I love it. It
is just worship leader talk, but it's the reality, because then because I'm not going to argue with it. Like, to me, it feels like these songwriters don't know about this. Like, they don't realize it needs to be within an octave. but the song they wrote is so incredibly awesome. I'm gonna do it because the song is great. So let's figure out how we can do it. Not to mention, the female male thing is, you got to really think about it.
Yeah. If you were to leave one piece of advice for your local songwriter within a church, what would you say?
I would say don't give up. A songwriter has to be amongst the most tenacious people on the planet because there's so many roadblocks, so many discouragements. But I passionately believe that we need your songs. We need your songs. We need the song of the church to come from more different people. Let's make it more like sermons. It doesn't have to be a new song every week, but let's make it more common, that it can be a song for the moment, And my last thing is, I'm telling you, you're going to last longer as a worship leader if you don't ignore your songwriting gift. And try to have a relationship with your pastor and the people that be. And if you are like, songwriting's my top gift, I'm very careful to say this. If songwriting's my top gift, and my church has said we absolutely do not want original songs for sure ever, then maybe you need to find another place. I've been at my church for decades. I'm not a church hopper at all, and I don't believe in that. But if that's the case, you've got to write. So yes, God bless them, encourage you to keep going and keep leading for decades for the glory of God.
Yes. Amen. Thank you so much, Tommy.
Okay.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode on our podcast. This week, we talked about songs in the church with Tommy Walker, and we discussed songwriting within the church and how local leaders should write more songs for their local church and the power that is. If you liked this episode, click that like button and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you soon.